And great pleasure to have joining us today on the Book Talk segment of the show. Man who's written a really interesting book about a very interesting city. It's called Detroit City is the Place to Be, the Afterlife of an American Metropolis. We're joined by a contributing editor at Rolling Stone, also the Men's Journal, Mark Binelli, today by telephone. And Mark, good to talk to you. How are you today?
Hey, how are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have a chance to talk with you a few minutes. Had a chance to read through the book. Now, I've never been to Detroit. I have a good friend down here in Sarasota who actually wrote for the Detroit News, so he tells me a lot of great stories about the city. Just reading your book, it sounds like an interesting place undergoing a transformation.
Definitely, yeah. I went back in 2009 for Rolling Stone, actually, to cover the auto show. I arrived in January, and probably 3 days after I got there, I was sitting in a dive bar in downtown Detroit watching the president be inaugurated. So the book, I didn't intend for this to happen, but the book ended up being sort of a snapshot of President Obama's first term as seen from ground zero of the recession. And Detroit is a strange place.
You grew up there your whole life? I know you live in New York now, or when did you? How long were you there?
Yeah, I grew. My parents are Italian immigrants, so I grew up there. Left for college, and then eventually ended up in New York. My family still lives there, so I would, return every year to visit. But in 2009, once I decided to write this book, I actually moved back and stayed about 3.5 years.
Just from my passing history of reading about it, or hearing about Detroit, it seems an interesting city because of its location. Obviously, it's not too far from Canada. It's Midwest. It has an Indian heritage as well, a Native American Indian heritage. So you have a lot of different cultures that have developed that city, and you kind of go back in the history of it over the past 300 years, right?
It's true. It's located right on a river, and of course, the Great Lakes. It started off as a trading city, actually. It was a French fur trading post originally. And then later, when it developed as an industrial city, Michigan is a pretty huge state, and it was easy to get all the natural resources down from the northern part of Michigan, lumber, iron ore, coal. And so that eventually played into Detroit becoming the auto capital of the world.
Was it that reason as well? Was it also because by chance that Henry Ford was there and some of the other early auto entrepreneurs who happened to be there, or was there a reason that they chose that area other than that?
Well, yeah, there were people around the same time that Ford was sort of developing his shop. There were pockets of other action all around different parts of the country, but when Ford really took off and exploded, and that created its own sort of momentum, the way I would compare it to Silicon Valley today. Once that becomes the hub for a few shops, then everyone wants to be there.
And I guess that's when really the city exploded, right? When the auto industry started back, I guess, early 1900s, maybe 1910, around there, I suppose, when Ford started. And that lasted for many, many years. But when was, in your opinion, the kind of the decline of Detroit? It wasn't just a few years ago with the auto industry having to go through the bailout. It was before that, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It got hit very hard during the Great Depression, and came back during World War II when the Detroit auto factories were turned into basically like tank and aircraft plants. Detroit became known as the arsenal of democracy. So that those were like the boom years post-war. But not long after that, the car companies started moving outside of the city. Residents, particularly white residents, started leaving the city. Suburban sprawl was happening, and the city was just allowed to sort of age and was especially abandoned. And so the siege, I would say, started probably in the late 1950s, and it's continued to sort of slow decline. Mm.
Now, all big cities have had racial issues over the years, and we read all about that, L.A., New York. But Detroit seems to have kind of a special, I wouldn't say special in a good way, but a unique position in that, right, with the whole race issue, doesn't it?
Definitely, it's been one of the most segregated parts of the country, and that, I will say that's one of the sort of more hopeful things I took out of my reporting is the fact that that seems to be starting to break down a little bit. In the last census, the population of Detroit proper went from about 1 million to just over 700,000. A lot of those people who left were middle class Black Detroit residents who basically wanted to get away from the crime, who wanted to get away from the failing school system, so they went out to the suburbs. And now the suburbs are, becoming much more diverse. Same time, young white artists and bohemian types who are attracted to the city and the cheap rents are starting to come into Detroit proper. So there's a potential for regional cooperation, I think, now that these demographics are sort of mixing up a little bit more. That I find hopeful.
You got some great stories in the book from the political end. You had some interesting mayors of the city of Detroit. The current one, though, a lot of sports fans would remember Dave Bing, a great basketball player for the Pistons. I guess he's still in office, right?
Yes, he is. And he was elected, in the wake of our previous mayor, Kwame Kilpatrick, who, is right now facing a federal racketeering trial, actually. Funnily enough, I was assigned to profile him way back in 2002 for Rolling Stone. This was way before I thought I would write a book about Detroit. And at the time, he was very popular. He was known as the hip-hop mayor. And spending time with him was really fascinating because he's kind of a brilliant guy, and he's incredibly charismatic and really had everybody kind of loving him at that point. But you could also see the seeds of his destruction. I mean, I spent a couple of days with him, and the one night ended around 12:30 with him and his entourage planning on going back to the mayoral mansion to get massages. They openly told me about this, and I thought, that's an interesting lack of discretion.
When Detroit, could you compare it, I guess, to what people think, Chicago-style politics, or is it a mix? What would you say?
There's some of that, yeah. There's definitely some of that. I mean, the thing is, though, people focus on the leadership, and people tend to have this idea that if only the right person were elected, if we got some sort of super accountant, they could balance the books and make everything tip top. But the fact of the matter is, the economy is in shambles because there's no tax base and there's no way to sort of pay for things, just the basic city services that people need. So, you can make Mike Bloomberg the mayor of Detroit unless he started writing personal checks, rather large personal checks. Those problems wouldn't be getting fixed. Yeah,
the industry, obviously not as much industries like in New York or Chicago. Is the music industry still a part of it up there? Motown have any place at all anymore in Detroit, or is that pretty much just a memory?
They left in the 70s, like a lot of other people and businesses. Yeah, Gary moved, I think, in like 73. Moved Motown out to L.A. There's still an interesting music scene. I mean, more recently it was sort of garage rock bands like the White Stripes and hip-hop artists like Eminem. But right now, in terms of arts, young artists, visual artists are the people who are getting the most attention. They're coming in and taking advantage of the cheap real estate, buying up houses for like $100,
wow.
Or warehouse spaces for like a couple of $1,000, and taking advantage of the fact that you have the space and the freedom to kind of try out whatever you want and possibly fail.
Good sports town, though, always has been. Obviously the Tigers, and not this year, but the Pistons in the past. Of course, Red Wings, a great old hockey town. So it's a good sports town, despite all the problems, right?
That's true. Yeah, we came close this year with the Tigers.
Right. I mean, there's a good fan base for that. But it's a fascinating book. I wish we had more time to talk about it. But it's called Detroit Cities, the Place to Be. We've been talking with Mark Binelli today. Mark, you have a website? People get a hold of the book or get a hold of you if they like?
Yeah, it's available in bookstores and on any sort of online retailers. And my personal website is markbinelli.com.
It's Binelli. And Mark, pleasure to talk to you for a few minutes. Hopefully we can do it again down the road. Thanks for joining us today.
That was great talking to you. Appreciate it.